Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation with David Mullen. As you know, David is known for his visually distinctive work. Just the last few years, the marvelous Mrs. Maisel has earned him 3 Emmy Awards and 2 ASC Awards, alongside a prestigious Career Achievement and Television Award from the American Society of Cinematographers just last year. In fact, he also just received the 2026 Cine Expo Award last night, the Carl Kresser Heart of the Community, and that was honoring his decades of contributions as an educator, author, and advocate for the filmmaking community. There are many more nominations and the whole history of work, but that would take up the entire time. So please welcome David Mullen. Thank you, David, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Just tell us a little about, I know you are a UCLA and a CalArts graduate, but you got like a kind of a late start into the filmmaking. Can you just tell us about how you started your filmmaking career?
I started making short films when I was 16 years old. My plan was to become a doctor, so I was studying Latin in high school. I entered a Latin convention contest. It was a talent contest, and I picked making a film. So I made a short film based on the Trojan War in the style of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So I was 16, and I just started making short films. And I went to first University of Virginia and then UCLA as a pre-med, but I'd spent so much time filmmaking that my grades as a pre-med student weren't great. And I tried transferring to UCLA's film school, but my GPA was 2.9, and you need a 3.0 to get into the film program there. So I got an English lit degree at UCLA because I figured I should learn writing if I'm going to be a filmmaker. I took 4 years off after graduating to pay off all my student loans and keep making short films. And during that time, I started to shoot a little for other people. I started to get work on some karaoke videos, and I was showing my short films at local festivals. It's all Super 8, black and white Super 8 mostly. And then I started doing 16 millimeter black and white, and finally got into CalArts when I was 26 years old as a master's student. And the first class we had to take there was a beginner Super 8 class. So while everyone else sort of got a camera from the shop and brought back out-of-focus footage with their friends in a park handheld, I turned in this black and white film noir that had Dutch camera angles and deep focus compositions and Russian montage editing and macro photography and dolly moves. And everyone was like shocked that you could do all that with a Super 8 camera, but I've just been doing it for a decade at that point. So instantly got both typecast as the slick guy and also got asked to shoot everyone else's project. So my first month at CalArts, I was already asked to shoot a graduate thesis film. So I came out of CalArts 3 years later with about 22 16 millimeter short films for other people and a 35 short film. But I had never got around to shooting my short film. And I went to the committee and I said, look, you've graduated 22 people based on my work. You should give me a master's degree. And they were like, they weren't happy, but they did.
Well, tell me about the films of 1977. You mentioned that in an article. There were 3.
My interest in filmmaking sort of grew out of my childhood interest in science fiction. So I was a huge Star Trek and Godzilla fan and all those sort of things. And then in 1970, and my parents owned this soundtrack album for 2001. And so I used to look at all the photos in the album and wanting to live in that world. And I loved the lighting and the colors and the design. And then in February of 1977, 2001, I was growing up in the desert of California. 2001 premiered on national television in February 1977. So I sat in front of that TV set, like a foot in front of the screen for 3 hours, just watching that movie on TV. And then that year also, I saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And then at the end of the year, I saw Star Wars, even though it had come out in May. It didn't come to Ridgecrest until December. So I saw Close Encounters first. But those 3 films just hit me with the filmmaking. Just trying to figure out how they were lit and how they were shot and how the effects were done. And actually confused the word cinematography when I was 15 years old with the word choreography. So when I talk about Close Encounters, I tell my friends, you got to see the cinematography, the way the people come at the lens and then the people go away and the camera goes here, then people come at you. And I didn't realize that was the directing. I thought that was the cinematography work, was the motion of people to camera, but that was Spielberg. but with Vilma Sigmund helping. But and of course, Close Encounters is a tremendous film about lighting. Lighting is a major visual element to the film. You can't help but notice the lighting. That film really got me interested in filmmaking. And then with Star Wars, I got interested in visual effects. And there was a period when I thought I would go into visual effects. So a couple of years on my own, I was studying Cinefex magazine and learning about optical printing and model work and matte painting. At some point, I started realizing that it was extremely tedious work. And there was a shot in Empire Strikes Back that was one of my favorites because it was just so realistic looking. It was a low-angle shot of the 3 Imperial walkers on the snow planet looming against the dawn sky silhouette, just very dramatic shot. And I was just, that's so realistic. It feels dramatic. And I read the article, and the guy says, oh, it's just photography. I just shot the models against a sky backing, and I put a fog filter on the lens, and then I underexposed it. So I realized that's what I wanted to do, was create mood and drama, not spend 6 months refining one shot, which is what a lot of visual effects back then was like. So even today, my studying visual effects has helped me in my day-to-day cinematography work, because you always end up with a discussion with the visual effects supervisor, and we're going to have to erase this. And I say, well, then you don't want the actor to cross this object because you'll be repainting that part of the body, right? And this part, you got to key in front of behind this thing, So I understand all the sort of issues they're going to run into.
Very good. So you're also known for being very generous with your knowledge. This one was very interesting to me. You say Conrad Hall's black and white photography in The Outer Limits, Season 1, 1963, is very impressive considering this was for TV broadcast. You say he often has characters moving in and out of deep shadows or fades, the lighting on face and midshot. Can you talk a little bit about why that's compelling to you?
Well, even especially back then, television production was extremely limited in terms of scheduling. They would do an hour episode generally in a week, where today we might have 9 days or something. They would do it in 5 days. So for him to do this elaborate black and white lighting style. And a similar thing happened in the first season of Star Trek. Jerry Finnerman, who had studied under Harry Stradling, had wanted to do all the lighting in a very elaborate theatrical way, with slashes of lights on eyes and backlights and kickers. And television, color television particularly, was very flat back then. Just put one 5K over the lens and you're lit kind of thing. So Conrad Hall worked very hard to create a mood. So he shot about 2/3 of season 1, and you can see the difference between him and the episodes he didn't shoot, because you get to his episodes and suddenly a ordinary set has got pools of light and shadows, and he does cues on the lighting, dimmer cues, and all sorts of things. I'm just amazed he was able to do it in that time slot. So clearly he's Conrad Hall, though.
Exactly. And you were saying, and we're also going to talk about a lighting solution on Big Sur. We're going to run something real quick just to look at. But you were saying you did a filter history.
I've been helping Ryan Avery, who used to be with Schneider, write a history of filters book. It's his book, really, but I've been doing research for him. I've always been fascinated, and there's an article in American Cinematographer about this diffusion that was used in Midsummer Night's Dream, which is a 1933 film. It's the last film to win an Oscar for cinematography on a write-in campaign. After that, the Academy got rid of the write-in option. So Hal Moore won the Oscar for that film. And I finally figured out by looking at the bokeh that the effect I was seeing, the star burst effect with these strange patterns, was all coming from using a lace weave as a filter. So there's some sort of very fine, sort of rose petal shaped lace weave fabric that's being used as a filter. It must be very thin and light, but it's hand woven. I have not been able to find it. I've been to fabric stores in London and Paris and New York, and they all look at me like one old guy said, "Oh yeah, they haven't made this stuff in 50 years." So I don't think I'll find it, except maybe through an antique shop or something. But
if you do,
then Ryan said, "Oh, there's some odd filtering going on in one scene in Sound of Music." So I looked at that one scene in the gazebo, and it was the same filter. And I was like, "Oh, this Ted McCord, who was Conrad Hall's mentor." And I remembered an episode of Outer Limits was quite diffused, the one with Martin Landau. And so I rewatched that I just got the Blu-ray set, and I was watching it. And there again was that filter in that one episode. It's quite heavy, but you see the same patterns, the same star bursts and everything. So Conrad Hall maybe inherited it from Ted McCord, who inherited it from Hal Moore. I don't know, but it's the only
Fantastic.
times I've run across this effect, and someday I'll find this piece of fabric.
We'll help you. So we're going to run this Big Sur clip because we're talking about lighting. So tell us a little bit about what we're going to see, and then we're going to run it without sound, if that's okay, you guys. And then you can talk us through it, but tee it up
So
if you don't mind.
Big Sur was made in 2010, and we shot on the Red Epic camera. Originally, I wanted to shoot in VistaVision. I was pushing, I redid all the research for Vista, because I wanted it to look like a Edward Weston. We're shooting on the coast of Big Sur, so I thought, well, it's a jazz-like, free-flowing novel, Big Sur, that I would shoot it's half San Francisco, half Big Sur, and I would shoot the San Francisco half in Super 16 and the Big Sur sequence in VistaVision, but that all went out the window with the budget. And they said, you have to shoot digital. So I said, well, the Epic had just come out, and said, well, I'll shoot a 5K camera and maybe I'll get something like a VistaVision feeling. Anyway, it was a very small film. We had found this
Jack Kerouac.
interesting cabin up in the hills of Big Sur. It was a hunter's cabin. We went up a fire road scouting, and we just ran across this moss-covered old wooden shack. It was just beautiful, and it's something that you could never afford to build in a low-budget film. So we said, well, shoot the movie at this cabin, even though it was impossible to get to up in the hillside. What we hadn't planned was if we'd lost the light, how to shoot day scenes at night, because I could only take so much lights up there. And the problem I had was this cabin was up against the hillside. So 3 sides had windows, but they were windows with no glass or curtains or anything, or just open square frames. And they looked out on pine forest. So when we lost the light and we still had a day scene left, I said, well, there's nothing I can do in my tricks to fake daytime, because if I try shining an HMI on these pine trees, the first trunk is going to be 5 stops over, the next trunk is going to be 3 stops, and it's still going to be pitch black 10 feet past those. There's too much depth of trunks and no greenery to light up other than these tree trunks. And I have no art department to bring stuff because we're up in the middle of nowhere. I have no curtains, no shears, nothing. So trying to figure out how to do the scene, I looked at the script, and in the narration, because it's all narrated by Jack Kerouac, it's all about how hungover he is. He says, I can barely see straight. I'm just so hungover. Everyone's talking at me. So I said, well, I'm going to shoot the whole scene as just the point of view of someone who's extremely hungover. And I'm going to shoot all his point of view shots on a lens baby that I've been carrying around that I had converted to PL mount. And I'm going to blow out the windows because that's all I can do anyway. I have bed sheets out all 3 windows and the front door. And I'm going to hide the fact they're just bed sheets out there by using the lens baby to blur things. And at one point, 2 of the characters go out the front door, and they just open the door right onto a big sheet. And at that moment, I pulled the lens baby to blur it as much as possible so you don't see the folds in the sheet and all that sort of stuff. But the reverses on Jack are shot normally, so because it's all his point of view that's shot with the lens baby. So it's a way of making lemonade out of lemons, but also it ended up being one of my favorite scenes because it was such an unusual way to shoot a normal dialogue scene. And it was a great project because Michael Polish basically took the novel Big Sur and just transposed all his stream of conscious narrative in his voiceover with no real description. Each scene was just, this scene is this section of the book. And so we would sit there and prep and go like, well, what are we actually shooting? Like it says, one scene, it says, I go to the City Light bookstores and I ask Ferengeli for the keys to the cabin, and I drive down to, and I'm like, do we just Mickey Mouse everything he says and see it? Because isn't that a bit pointless, like to just see what he says? So it was a great experience of just daily kind of coming up with a scene that was about the words, but not precisely the words. So it was a fun project.
Across the meadow and back to the haunted cabin. I begin to feel extremely low as soon as last night's alcohol wears off. I can't chop wood for fear I'll cut a foot off. I can't sleep, I can't sit, I can't pace. I keep going to the creek to drink water till finally I'm going down there 1,000 times, making Lou Welch wonder as he's come back with more wine.
I'm hungry. Lou is hungry. Are you starving? I'm Lou starving.
What should we eat?
I got an idea.
What?
So he's narrating about his day and how hungover he is and how he would leave the cabin to go to the river and come back. And they're all talking about going fishing for breakfast and stuff. I think the main lenses on this film were master primes and with some ingenue zooms. But this is a lens baby, the old original lens baby with the rubber lens. You essentially I have to have a monitor right next to my camera, and I'm trying to shift it. The trick with the lens baby is it's easy to make things blurry. The hard thing is make things sharp. So you want moments where the focus lands for a second, so there's a sharp bit, and then you let it go after that. It's very taxing on your wrist because one hand you're operating, and the other hand you're trying to flex this lens and look at a monitor and try to play with it, but then find moments to find the focus again. Right behind her head is like just rows of pine trees, so it's the only I had to put this big sheet right out there. I think his angle, I put 216 over all the cracks in this wooden shack and then blew it out with some HMIs so that it wouldn't look like night out there. This is a scene from Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, season 3, and our first episode in Miami. We went there for 2 episodes. This is a dialogue scene. Often, Amy Sherman-Palladino stages things in a oneer. So since this being a magic hour scene, because I wanted magic hour with the neons and all this, I said, is this a oneer? And she says, no, we got to cover this. And I was like, well, how do I cover a magic hour scene in Miami? Because every take, the light's going to be very different. So we had to run 4 cameras. We actually didn't use there was a 4th camera on the balcony that you see in the center of frame on the 2nd floor doing a high wide master of their walk and talk. They didn't use that. But the camera's on a Steadicam. It cranes down from the neon sign, steps off the Steadicam and chases them. And as they get to the pool, B camera now on track is on the other side of the pool on a 100mm lens tracking with them while the Steadicam is still chasing their backs just off the left edge of frame there. And luckily, because I'm, f2 on a Primo, modern Miami is out of focus enough that visual effects did not have to try to make this in the 1959 Miami. As long as things were soft, we could sort of get away with some of the modern elements in the frame. So we're back to the Steadicam angle now. They've passed the pool. And then, we're back to B briefly. And then they go to their hotel room, and the Steadicam looks in the room, and in the room is another camera looking back at the doorway. We were able to hide the camera in the room by putting a white card over the bathroom entrance and cutting a hole for the lens. But their camera was looking back at the 2 of them with the twilight behind them and the Steadicam hovering behind Lenny Bruce's shoulder there. So we had to shoot a plate right after we rolled of every take of that background and then erase it in post. And then finally, in the Steadicam master, she walks away and the camera rotates around. And in the far background, originally, is the crane that started the whole thing. Now there's a grip standing on it in midair because once the Steadicam steps off, a grip steps on for the weight. So here the Steadicam had to be erased right behind his shoulders. But here the camera that was shooting them is in that white wall, but you can't, his head is actually blocking the lens there. So luckily we didn't have to erase that camera to this camera. But like I said, every take, the light was radically different. Take 1, it was almost daylight. By take 5, it was just pitch black night, or take 6. And when we finished, we owed 1 reverse angle on Lenny Bruce. And I asked Amy, I said, you have to pick which take you're going to use because the light is different in every take. The first few takes is very bluish daylight. The last take is very warmish tungsten. So she walks away. Where in the background was a crane sitting there where that parasol is. And then we owed this reverse back on him shot at night, and I lit it to match what I thought the ambient light was on her angle. So, but like I said, if she had picked take 2, I would have had to put a lot of bluish light and very little warm light. And if it had been take 5, I would have had to take away all the blue light. So luckily she picked my favorite take, which was just late enough in the twilight that it feels like night, where I get a mix of blue and warm and neon and things. So.
Well, let's talk about Amy just a little bit. She received 6 Primetime Emmy Awards for her work, including Outstanding Comedy Series, Outstanding Directing for a Comedy Series, Outstanding Writing for a Comedy Series, and Outstanding Music Supervision, all for the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And she was the first woman to win a comedy, writing, and directing categories in the same year, the Primetime Emmys. Another thing I heard you say is that the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel was aggressively pastel. What does that mean?
When I did the pilot, the discussions was all about the look, of course. And the one thing they told me in the job interview is we don't want period photography. We don't want, what they mean is we don't want the honey-colored, sepia, golden, Godfather-y look. We want color, lots of color. I studied a lot of 50s movies, but also 50s advertisement, 50s art, and talking to our production designer, Bill Groom. My feeling was that the 50s feeling, what is I called industrial optimism. It was so post-war optimism where the future was going to be great, like modernist architecture and furniture and offices were well lit. And there was this kind of feeling like everything after the war is going to be upbeat and very money-oriented, but very positive expression. And there was a lot of color, but it was often not saturated. But especially in the movies, they would offset color with neutrals. So you would have a kitchen that's painted gray with a yellow toaster and a blue refrigerator, and you really notice those colors, even if it's an eggshell blue and a pale yellow, because it's offset against gray or tan or some beige color. So I thought that they really pushed these colors like pink and things like that, but they weren't saturated colors. They were pastels, but they really hit you the way they put so much light on them often, and then frame them against something neutral, like this recording booth, for example. There's no strong colors in the scene. She's wearing a pale yellow hat and a pale cyan dress, but she's in a very almost black and whitish room. So again, you notice the colors, plus also the softer, more frontal lighting tends to bring out the color in the scene. Now, in this case, this is a frame that's up right now. We do so much camera movement on Maisel that often the only place to put a light is overhead because I'm seeing 360 degrees. So the trick for me was always how to have an overhead light that was not unattractive by being right over someone's head, creating eye shadows. And so I'd always try to get that soft light like ahead of them so it was more 3/4 frontal than dead overhead. So in this case, it's like, I think, a Light Mat 4 rigged off a boom arm in this little recording booth.
We're going to run another clip, and we're going to run it twice, everybody, because these two are oneers, and I think that they're just so worth seeing, and with the sound and everything, it all works so beautifully. Before we run it, we talk a little bit about her choreography, and you mentioned that in a story.
Amy is a former dancer, and she's friends with our choreographer, Marguerite. She loves to block actors as if it's a dance. And at times when we have crowds, we learned our lesson in season 1 is that we had a complicated oneer technocrane disconnect moving shot, which is the first time we did it. And all the moves depended on an extra crossing the frame and taking us to the next place. And we did like 11 takes because we'd swing around and the extra would be a beat late. We'd land and nothing was there, or we'd band and they were a beat early, and we were like, oh shit. And so after that, Amy was like, I need dancers. I need extras, dancers as extras. At least a third of the crowd have to be dancers, and Marguerite will come in and choreograph the extras. And so we could have someone twirl through the frame right at the right moment the camera lands, and then we come here and another one comes in the frame at the right moment. Because dancers can hit marks, they can hit marks to music. So in this first clip is the first time we arrive in Miami at the Fontainebleau Hotel. And of course, Amy demanded a certain number of extras be dancers. But the other thing when we scouted, it was all about the fountains in front of the Fontainebleau. And we planned to technocrane through the fountains up to the taxis pulling up. And then we scouted the inside of the lobby. And knowing Amy, the first thing I said to her is, I bet you'd like to play this in one shot, wouldn't you? And she goes, can you do that? Can you do that? And I go, well, you plan to do a big technocrane in the lobby, and we have a technocrane outside, so you're going to have to order 2 technocranes, and you're going to have to take the camera off one technocrane and attach it to the second technocrane and all these sort of things. And then I had to figure out how to light, a shot where I couldn't bring any lights through the windows because I'm starting outside. I got lucky in the sense that the Fontainebleau itself has a big shelf over the front revolving doors, and they had a row of like 6 Source 4 Licos lighting their ceiling, tungsten Licos. So I swapped them out to Daylight Joe Licos. So I had a ceiling bounce for the main part of the lobby, which was fine, except she keeps going to the second half of the lobby, which has no overhead lighting, and falls off very quickly. And the only thing I could do in there was I just put a Lico in the middle of the floor on the ground, pointed straight up at the ceiling, and asked visual effects to paint it out. I tried to have an extra hide it with their body, and that didn't work. So and there was a power cord too that had to be painted out. So there's a deep in the background by a piano. You'll notice in the ceiling there's a pool of light from that Lico. I thought about asking visual effects to paint that out as well, but it's still there. So there's a big circular Lico spotlight on the ceiling that's coming from nothing now because this light on the ground has been erased. So when we finally got there on the day we did the shot, it follows Midge into the lobby and up to the reception desk, and we'd always planned to then cut to over the back of the receptionist as Midge approaches the desk. And Amy said, can we keep going and fly over the desk and spin around and land on Midge and do it and not have a cut? And we weren't prepared for that. I said, well, to do that, we need a third operator to take the movie, and we tried. The trouble is the movie, it's heavy, even, so we walked up with the movie. Larry McConkey walked up and leaned over the desk, and my B operator, Greg Principato, tried to lean over the desk and grab it, but now Larry's holding all the handles. So Greg is trying to one hand to grab the center of it, but it's still, God knows, 30 pounds or whatever. He's trying to one hand, and it just was never smooth. And if Amy said, yeah, if I thought about it in prep, we could have maybe designed a front desk that you could walk through and walk around and not have to cut. But so they didn't use that last handoff, even though we did shoot it. It just wasn't smooth enough. So we went back to our original idea of doing a cut at that point. So
let's watch it.
Yeah.
Somewhere beyond the sea.
Buy yourself some driving gloves.
Whew, it's hot.
Watch the bad guy. Watch the bad guy.
Right, all right, please put those on the bottom. Those are hats. Hats on top, right side up.
Hats on top, so you remember. Maisel and Myers, you got a girl? Take her to a show. Oh, God, I'm sweating my ass off. Are you sweating your ass off?
Take off your jacket.
How's that gonna help my ass?
Welcome to the fountain.
Susie Meyerson, buy yourself something pretty.
We're here with the Shy Baldwin tour. Yes, follow me.
Susie Meyerson, remember the face? Susie Meyerson, remember the face? Susie Meyerson, remember the face?
You don't have to tip everyone, you know.
And to be a big shot, you gotta act like a big shot. Big shots tip.
But that guy doesn't work here.
What? Shit. Hey, give me that back.
It's near beyond the moon. I know beyond a doubt my heart will lead me there soon. We'll meet beyond the shore. We'll kiss just as before. Happy we'll be beyond the sea, and never again I'll go say.
So we're gonna run it one more time, and with no sound, and you can just walk us through it one more time.
I've done a couple of these oneers that start outside, inside, daylight to interior, and one of the biggest problems is you're limited to the range of the f-stops of the lens, right? So I'm shooting like an 8-11 split here because I'm going to end up at a 2.8 or 2.8 or 2.84 inside. First thing I had was the filters all kept coming into focus. This is a HBM 1/8, I think, Hollywood Black Magic. The dimples in the filter are slightly in focus as you look at the glints on the car, but it was acceptable. But there's a lot more depth of field than I normally would shoot. I wouldn't shoot at 8-11 normally, but because I have to go in here, and there's trying to bring her up in the awning, I hid one Joker 400 on that column. I put a clamp up there and bounced it in the ceiling right above her head there. Then we go in, and there's the Joe Licos hitting the ceiling from that shelf that she walked out from under. We pan this way. She's almost looking right into the Technocrane that we attached to. It's just off camera right, but the track for it is running through the shot, so that had to be erased. At one take, we hit the chandelier coming down, and then as we came down, an extra, not a dancer, pushing the cart of luggage, just hit the camera, just hit Larry McConkey in the movie and went to the ground. So that guy. So anyway,
It's fantastic.
so then this is where we had to cut. Our original plan was, and I was really pushing the exposure back there. I couldn't indie gel, a massive 100-foot glass window like that. And I couldn't light the interior any brighter. So that's one of these things where it is what it is. I was, of course, hoping for a little overcast maybe, but Miami looked better in full sunlight because that's where you imagine Miami should be like. So I was fighting the sun, but when we did get overcast, because storms rolled in constantly too, I kind of missed the sunlight at that point. There's a oneer that starts out on a push-in on a swimmer at a pool, and she dives in the pool, and the camera dives in with her, and now watches an underwater ballet. Then it rises up and looks straight down on the underwater ballet from above the air, and then it rises straight up looking down, and all the water on the crane is now draining off that camera. So I'm trying to figure out how to keep the lens clean, and I tried putting air blowers around it, but the air blowers would pick up water and dribble onto the lens. So we took off all the air hoses, and we ended up just putting Rain-X on the glass and hoping the water would beat off right away as soon as we tipped down. And then it comes down on Midge in a lawn chair, and then it tracks around the pool and rises up again. So it's a 50-foot techno crane going underwater with an underwater housing and out of the water. And to do a smooth crane move, you need a perfectly balanced crane, but a crane goes underwater, a camera instantly goes from being heavy to being buoyant. So the minute it hits the water, I have to have a piece of pipe across the crane that 2 grips shove the camera under the water like they're trying to drown it, and then let go and let it pop up like a cork. And the light was not great because we planned a 2-hour pre-call for the techno crane. Someone showed up with a piece of equipment and blocked the driveway to location. The guy who dropping off the crane didn't call production, so he got stuck at the entrance to the parking lot where we were supposed to be ready to shoot by 10 o'clock. We weren't shooting till noon, and now the light's dead overhead, and when I crane up and look straight down over the pool, the arm shadow of the crane is over a third of the shot, which wasn't going to happen if I had shot it at 10 like I'd planned. So, it's those sort of things happen, but we fixed most of the problems, but I still feel it's not as smooth as it could have been.
Well, let's talk about the next one, Femininity. Can you tee that one up, and then we'll watch it in its full glory?
Our season 4 was mostly set in a burlesque theater set we'd built, a huge set with seating and like an old theater. And we had all these burlesque numbers that get more and more elaborate as Midge sort of takes over this rundown theater and makes it popular, and people start coming in and they have more money for shows and stuff. So we had this number called Femininity, which was sort of like a rear window dollhouse set, essentially, where it's all these rooms with different burlesque numbers are going on. So the lower rooms have a roof right over the heads of the dancers. And the problem I constantly run into is that I want to use modern LED stage lighting, but I can't see it because it's not period correct. Any light you see is a tungsten light with gel on it. Because that would be correct for the period. But we cheated by putting in the fixtures in each set, we put Astera bulbs, the NYX bulbs, that we could color cue. And in the front-facing fascias of the set, there would be a strip lighting of LED colored lighting that we could cue that was off camera. But the problem with this shot was that we weren't first sure it was going to be a oneer, but Amy wanted the bulk of it to be a oneer. And we finally did a test run of it. It was exactly the length of the song, so it was a oneer. There was no reason to make any coverage. But she said, I want the camera to fly up onto the stage, go into the room, see the whole dance from behind the set, looking back at the audience, and then come out of the room and come back and see the set again from the front. Which always brings up these questions of how, we always sit there and how we're going to do this. And Amy always likes Steadicam the most because she only has to talk to one operator. As soon as we do a Technocrane Movi move, there's a Movi operator, there's a Movi wheel operator, there's a Technocrane boom arm operator, there's a guy in the extension, the telescoping arm. It's such a compound move that to make adjustments, you're trying to coordinate between 3 or 4 people. Well, as a Steadicam, it's just one person. So I knew she would prefer to do this Steadicam. And I said, can the camera go into the lower window and not an upper window? And she goes, why? And goes, well, if it goes to an upper window, it has to be on a crane. If it goes to a lower window, it could be Steadicam if we could figure out how to get onto the stage. And I said, the other problem with the crane is there's much more visual effects involved because the moment I spin around and look back, there's going to be a crane parked in the middle of the audience, and 1/3 of the audience is going to have to be digitally added back in. And if we do this as Steadicam, then we can shove the whole house visible without any equipment in the shot. But then the other thing I said, when you come back and you look at the stage from behind, you're going to see all the backstage equipment, you're going to see the lighting, you're going to see all the stuff. And he goes, no, I want it to look just as pretty from behind as in front. It shouldn't be like a window on the ugliness of backstage life. It should just look as if it was designed to be seen from both directions. We had a lighting designer named Don Holder. He's a Broadway lighting designer. He did a lot of our bigger dance shows like this. So he did the lighting for this, and I had to tell him, look, you have to watch this whole number from both directions because you got it. All the front lights become backlights. You have to think about camera shadows and other things. And then we decided to put a ramp for the Steadicam to go up onto the tongue on the stage, so it could just walk onto the stage and then walk into the first room on the left. And then the problem is the rooms on the bottom are lit from the booms on each side, and I knew that once the camera got in that room, it was going to throw a camera shadow over the dancers. So we had to cue out the side lighting, which meant the only lighting was going to be what's built into the set. And at one point, the last room, the green room at the corner is the room we come out of again. The light, when we faded out the side lighting, the room got so dark that the only way I could light it was I put an NYX bulb on the Steadicam. And at the moment the green light from the booms faded out, I faded up the light bulb on the camera. So there'd be green light on the dancers for a moment until we could cue back on the stage light again. Once we decided to be Steadicam, it had to be a step onto a crane. I asked the key grip, can we step onto a crane and dolly the Steadicam operator across the set and then lower it again and have him step off again? If the base of the crane is in that red room in the bottom left corner, the bucket is left of that. So the key grip had to chainsaw part of the set to make room for the weight bucket, which didn't make our art director happy, but because he had to fix it later. But we track across and he steps off, and now the problem is the crane itself is parked visibly in the right corner of the shot, which had to be painted out. In fact, the grips are standing there and everything. And there was track visible at the bottom edge of frame running along the base of the set. You could see the track between the backdrop, and I needed enough room. I told the art director that this drop, you have to have at least 6 feet or 5 feet because I need room to run this crane between the back of the set and the drop. And then we had to light the drop and not, all these sort of issues. So, and then I, again, had to figure out how to make the room itself look interesting from the wrong direction, essentially from the point of view of the dancers out to the house. So,
Well, let's take a look.
Femininity just seems to bring a crowd to my vicinity. Other girls have the same these, them, and those, but they always manage to stay in their clothes. Personalities, my personality, just makes them all expect my hospitality. When a man brings me home, I ask him in. I only intend to have one little gin. Why do I always end up on the tiger skin? There are times I can't help feeling as I'm staring at the ceiling. What's the point of
a shot like that, because it's so complicated, Amy's very much definitely tells them to schedule a rehearsal day. The shot was going to be done by Larry McConkey, but Jim McConkey, our operator, but he brought in his brother Larry, who rehearsed it on his own while we were shooting in somewhere else in Steiner. And at the end of the day, we all came in and he did a test run with no dancers at all, just the move up the steps and the whole crane down and out again. And the reason, and we ran the music because I felt it was important for the choreographer to see how often her dancers were off camera, because there's no reason for them to do any big dance number if we're on this room and in this room and in this room, and those dancers are off camera for a chunk of the song. So once we saw the timing of the move and where we were looking moment to moment to moment, we finished the lighting and shot it in, a couple hours, 2 hours, 3 hours. It went pretty smoothly, but often these really big, complicated things, Amy will demand a schedule and a rehearsal like a week earlier or something, so we could see what the problems are going to be. We can get the right equipment for it, if we can have to change the set or the costumes or something to make it work. Now with Miami, we couldn't do that. We scouted it, then we came down for our week of filming or 2 weeks, whatever, and the Fontainebleau limited our access there, so that was one where we couldn't pre-rehearse that one. So
You just shot a feature film with Amy called Eloise in London, I think, and that was on the Raptor X. Is it similar in terms of the energy, or and why did you change cameras again?
Well, we shot Maisel on the Alexa Mini, and then we did the Alexa 35 on Étoile. Since we do so much work on Steadicam and Movi, and Jim McConkey is constantly carrying the camera, for me, every season I would look at our weight. How heavy is the camera? How are the lenses? What can the Movi handle? What can Jim handle? Take 30 takes or whatever. I'd settled on VA primes because they were the lightest, pretty much at Panavision, because I needed a range of focal lengths. I couldn't use like super speeds or something that only come in an 18, 25, 35, 50, 75. I needed 28s. I needed 32s or whatever. So we'd done primo lenses on Maisel, but when we switched to the Alexa 35, I switched to the VAs to save 1.5 pounds on the weight of the lenses. So when I looked at Eloise, I had just seen Conclave and September 5, which were shot on the V-RAPTOR, and I really liked the look. And so I looked at the specs, and it just came down to the V-RAPTOR is a 4-pound camera versus a 6.5-pound Alexa 35 versus a 9-pound Venice 2. Noise was much better on the V-RAPTOR. It was so much cleaner on the Raptor. So it taught me one thing is I don't need to rate the camera at 800. I could rate it faster because it's cleaner. So I end up rating it 1,000 to 1,250, but towards the end of the shoot, I rated it at 1,600. And that seemed to be the sweet spot.
Well, we were so delighted to get to spend this time with you, David. Thank you very much.